Do you ever get disappointed because you've shared a crochet project that you finished with somebody and their response was less than overwhelming? Today we're going to talk about that and a few other topics on our crochet and coffee, and join me so we can dive right in. Welcome back. And the first thing I want to say for all of you veterans out there, for everybody that I know, my son who's a veteran, and so many amazing people that are in my life and out there in the world, thank you so much for your service and everything that you have contributed to making our country a better place. Okay, next up, before we dive into the main topic, don't worry, it won't be too long. If you recall, I have been working on the Celosia Dolman sweater, and I got 43 rows in and realized it was going to be just way too big for me. I don't know whether it was my gauge. I don't know whether it was the hook size that I was using. I did a gauge swatch initially and it came out fine, but if you've been crocheting very long, you know that oftentimes your tension changes as you go. So that certainly could have contributed. And I think that just the positive ease that comes with this particular pattern, it was just getting way too big for me and I wasn't going to be happy with it. So I frogged 43 rows. Well, probably down to 41. So I'm back to the ribbing. And even that, as I look at it now, I kind of feel like, oh my gosh. No, I think it'll be okay. I don't want it. I don't want the ribbing too small, too tight around the waist, because then I can't get it over my breasts. So I think the ribbing will be okay where it is, and I'm just going to start over from there and modify it. I'm going to go back to a size medium instead of a large, and I'm going down a 0.5 millimeter hook size. So the pattern actually calls for a 5 millimeter. I was using a 4.5 millimeter to get gauge, and now I'm going down to a 4 millimeter hook size, just to be cautious. I really was fighting last night trying to figure out whether or not I was going to frog this whole thing. And I just got to the point where I'm like, you know what? If I finish this, it's going to be way too big and I'm just not going to be happy with it. And I mean, if it's too big for me before I even wash it and block it, it's just going to get larger. And so that just wasn't going to make me happy at all. So I made that decision to go ahead and frog it. Hours and hours and hours worth of work. But the other thing that sort of factored in a little bit was the fact that I was afraid that I wasn't going to have enough yarn left. And based on the fact that it was huge, even the measure, I mean, it was supposed to be a certain number of inches across wingspan, and I was way over that. So I know something was off on it. And my count was correct, so I can only assume it was the gauge. So for that reason, I'm like, maybe I'm going to run out of yarn if I keep doing this, and I don't want to have to go buy another skein. It's not the least expensive because it is it's not a solid color. It's the Knit Pick Stroll Effects. So there's some variegation in the coloring. It's actually called Sangria, and it does work out very pretty, but because it's not a solid color, it's a little bit more expensive. So as we were watching a movie last night, I made that hard decision to go ahead and frog the entire thing back and start over from scratch. And that's where we are. We're going to start over. Hopefully this time, because I'm doing a medium, it'll go a little bit faster. And because I'm a lot more clear on the pattern. Now, I've been doing a lot of shorts this month on gratitudes for Thanksgiving. And one of the things that I did share is a gratitude. I sort of stopped doing them because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is this doing a short every single day got really overwhelming. I'm like, that's not why I'm doing this. So I'm going to let myself off the hook and not do them every single day. And one of the gratitudes that I shared was the idea of perseverance, to be able to really stick with doing this pattern or any pattern and just keep going no matter how tedious and time consuming. And if I have to frog it back, it's teaching me perseverance to stick with it no matter what and just keep going. Now, that doesn't mean that occasionally I don't put something in hibernation and say, you know what, I'm going to work on that later. But this particular project, I really wanted to have this sweater for the holidays. So I decided I was just going to persevere. And even though I had to frog it all the way back, I'm going to keep working on it. And we'll see. Hopefully I can still finish it by Thanksgiving. That's not that far away actually right now, so it might end up being a Christmas sweater instead, which is okay. I'm gonna let myself off the hook. So yeah, that's where we are on that. In the meantime, I've also started another pattern, a sweater that I'm making for my granddaughter, and that one uses the super bulky yarn, which I've never used before, so that's sort of an interesting change. I don't hate it. It's different. And it is the Bernat blanket yarn. So it's pretty fluffy, and it almost gives me the impression of a really soft bathrobe. A really soft bathrobe. And that's kind of the texture and feel of it. And so it'll make a really nice sweater for her. She lives in North Carolina, so while it doesn't get really cold there are certainly cold days, and I think she'll enjoy it because it's in purple and she loves purple just like her grandma does. So that one should work up pretty quickly though, because it's the blanket yarn and because it is for my granddaughter who is 5, so it won't be very big. That one I should at least get finished by the end of the month. This one, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But today I really wanted to talk about expectations. What I mean by that is not like our expectations of the outcome of projects, which certainly could be a topic that we could talk about, but I see a lot in the groups that I'm in, the crochet groups, whether they're on Reddit or Facebook. I see people posting that they're very upset and disappointed because they shared a result, a project that they created with somebody, and the response was less than overwhelming. So the person that they shared it with, maybe they gave them some negative feedback or said something that was very disappointing. And that made the person that worked so very, very hard on this project, it made them very upset. And I totally understand why somebody would be upset if they shared a project. Let's say it's with your spouse, and your spouse just looked at it and said, well, that's ugly, or really? That's the best you got? Or I wouldn't wear that, or I hope you don't plan on making this your career. I mean, there's a million different negative responses that could come out from that. And that could be very heartbreaking. It can be very painful to hear that kind of response when you've just worked a lot of hours and put a lot of effort into creating something. Now, don't get me wrong. Everything that I make doesn't get positive vibes. Sometimes it's my own impression, sometimes it's others. generally speaking, most of the people that I've brought into my world are very complimentary, but sometimes I can look at those things and say that really wasn't my best. But there are other times when I don't get the reaction that I was hoping for. And so I have to do a double check on my own sort of, okay, how am I going to take that? Is that going to be okay that they don't like it? Now, here's the thing. I did a video last month, I think it was. I'll link to it below, and you can check it up the corner up here, about giving gifts, crochet gifts, and what kind of expectations around that. And this ties into it a little bit, but maybe this one you're not giving as a gift. Maybe this is something that you were making for yourself, and yet still the response isn't what you were hoping for.
I was not expecting that.
So I wanted to share a story with you. Probably about 12, maybe even a little bit longer or so years ago, I wrote a book. I know, crazy, right? It was a self-help book called Positivity on Purpose. It's still available on Amazon. If you really want it, I'll link to it below. I don't expect you to go buy it, but it wasn't a bad book. And it was all about teaching people how to be more positive. Kind of like I still like sharing those tips here. And one of the things that happened to me that shifted my world in a really, really big way was when I finished writing this book, which took me probably about 9 months. So it literally was like birthing a child. I finished the book and I was going to have a book signing party. A lot of the people that I knew, a lot of people that had supported me in the effort to write this book, who knew what it was about, they all encouraged me to do this. And so I was going to have a book signing party as a way to kind of launch the book. And up until this point, my husband had not said anything positive about the book. He hadn't said, wow, it's amazing that you're writing a book. I'm so proud of you. I could never do that. Nothing. It just was, as if I was writing an email. Just another kind of thing that you do, and big deal. Who cares? So I had zero expectation when I told him that I was going to be having this book signing party. In fact, I didn't even invite him. I simply said, by the way, I'm having this book signing party and I won't be home. Here's the date and time that I'm not going to be available. So I didn't invite him. I mean, I didn't tell him he couldn't come, but I just didn't have any expectations whatsoever that he would be there, because he gave me no indication that this was of any significance whatsoever. And his response actually surprised me. He was like, well, of course I'm going to be there to support you, which really lightened me up. It was an amazing feeling to get that from him. But I think it was even more amazing because I did not expect it. Now, normally in a spouse relationship like that, women in particular, I would say, go into it expecting their spouse to be their biggest cheerleader. We think and often it is a result of that, we are our spouse's biggest cheerleaders. So we expect them to be the same way that we are. And we go in thinking, well, if I did something that I'm really proud of, they're going to know it and they're going to be like, wow, that's amazing. And then when that doesn't happen, or we get, whether it's just oh, that's great, or wow, really? That? uh, we can be very hurt because it's not what we were expecting. And I read a quote recently, or it wasn't really a quote, but just a phrase that basically says, don't go to the hardware store and expect to buy milk. And I love this idea, this analogy or concept, because what it means is sometimes the people that we expect to be our biggest cheerleaders, that we really think they're the ones that are gonna, give us that biggest rah rah, you're awesome, that was amazing. They're just not designed to do that. My husband's, if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, his the one that he struggles to deliver the most by far is words of affirmation. It's just not his zone of genius. He does not deliver words of affirmation as well as and oddly enough, we've been married for, oh my gosh, 20 going on 24 years now, and words of affirmation is my primary love language. So how I ended up making it work with somebody whose ability to deliver the love language that I need the most is, he just really struggles with it, and yet somehow we make it work. And I think part of that is because I've lowered my expectations. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean that as like, well, I just lowered my expectations. I can't expect it from him, so I'm not going to get it. But I realized that I don't need him to deliver those words of affirmation. I can get what I need in that way from other places, and I can get what he's able to give me from him. And by shifting my perspective on that and shifting my ability to expect something different from him, it makes it so that when I don't get those words of affirmation from him, I'm not surprised. And when I'm not surprised, I'm not heartbroken. That's the thing. A lot of times we are disappointed or frustrated or saddened because we had certain expectations and those expectations were not met. So when we can shift our expectation and understand that we might not get what we think whether or not it's that you need it, but you just expect it, and then you don't get it, sometimes that's shocking, and that shock can be hurtful, it can be disappointing. So if you shift that expectation and just kind of get to that place where you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna get.
What? Oh, be a fun surprise.
And I'm okay with that. Then all of a sudden it takes the sting out of any sort of a negative reaction that we might get. And it makes it a little bit more palatable. So today, so here's some tips. I wanted to essentially share some tips today on how you can, because we don't have the ability to change other people, but we have the ability to change the way we perceive what other people do. So I can't change my husband. He's never going to be really strong with words of affirmation. And yet, when I understand that and I can instead appreciate that, instead of saying, you did a really great job, he might come up and he might touch the item that I made and then give me a look. And I understand that that is his way of saying, you did a really great job. So it's being we become interpreters or translators. And now I would love to say that it would be brilliant if we were with people that we didn't have to translate their language, but there are, I think, almost 8 billion, maybe even 8 billion people on this planet, which means there are 8 billion different languages. Meaning we all come with a set of understanding. We come with different backgrounds and different baggage and different things that go into making us who we are. So even though we may all speak English, the words that we use or the tone that we use or the facial expressions that we use all go into that level of communication, which shifts. You may say the exact same thing and mean two totally different things. You may not say anything, but mean something very powerful. And so our best bet in relationships is really to be a translator and understand that what the person is saying may not be in the language that I would use, but let me see if I can understand in a language that I would use what they're saying in the language that they use. Hopefully that makes sense and didn't confuse y'all. But essentially, it's shifting your expectation and being able to understand that they may share something in a very different way. For example, I have some very, very dear friends whose spouses are, everything that they do and say comes with a snide comment. And I remember very vividly telling one of my friends one point, I don't know how you could be with a person who's so mean and nasty. And then she kind of confided in me and she said, that's the way he was raised. He's not mean and nasty. If he's not snide with you, it means he doesn't like you. If he's just mellow and calm and kind and you know, all of the things that I would expect, that means he doesn't like you. So if he likes you, he's going to be snide. To me, I'm like, I don't know. That's just, I don't know how anybody could handle that. But she understood and she translated his love language, his ability to communicate. So when he gives an offhanded kind of, in my opinion, very rude comment, that is the utmost compliment to her. So it's a different way of speaking. Now, sometimes you'll never be able to adequately interpret or translate somebody's language, and you shouldn't have to. If it becomes very, very challenging or very confrontational, then it is not something that you want to stick with. And let me put that caveat on here. This does not, I don't want to condone abusive behavior by any means. You should not translate abusive behavior. That is not what I'm saying here whatsoever. So if somebody is really seriously mean and antagonistic and nasty, that should not be tolerated. But you shouldn't be in that relationship either. So, I'm not trying to say that an abused person should tolerate that abuse because you're not good enough at interpreting their love language. No, that's not it at all. That's so far from what I'm trying to say here. But if you are in a healthy relationship and you're just struggling because sometimes they are not overly excited or react the way that you would want them to about a certain project that you created, then that's totally different, and we can shift our expectations around that. So one of the other things that I really work very hard to do is to limit my expectations. And understand that if I ask him, what do you think of this? I may not get that response that I want. I may not get the, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So not only do I limit it and realize that I'm not going to get that response that I may not get that response I'm expecting, but I also work very hard to kind of give him, not kind of, I'm very clear and I will say, sweetie, I love you. I'm going to show you something and I really need you to give me your best positive response. I worked very, very hard on this and I would love to get some positive feedback. Should we have to give them that clue to say, yeah, this is okay to lie to me right now? Maybe, maybe not, but the fact is that they don't know what you're expecting because they're not mind readers. And they might not understand until you've trained them for a long enough period of time. And this doesn't mean that once you can say, I've just started to do this thing called crochet. And so every time I show you a project, I want you to give me a raving response about how amazing it is.
That's amazing. Do you want to try them on?
And then 2 projects later, still expect them to give that raving response. It's a training process. We can't teach our kids overnight to brush their teeth on a consistent basis. We have to give them that prompt over and over and over again for a long period of time. And we have to do that with the people we love as well, the adults that we love. We have to give them that prompt over and over again to say, I worked really hard on this and I really need some positive feedback on it. And positive feedback looks like, you did a great job, or that looks really amazing, or, whatever it is for you. We have to teach them those things because they don't speak our language. We have to teach them our language, and we have to get them to understand what that looks like. Now, if you have somebody that's just either that just feels overwhelming, or you don't want to teach them that language, or they're just not getting it, then another option is don't ask their opinion. Don't go to them and say, what do you think of this? Because you don't know that they're going to like it. And if it's going to hurt your feelings when they say, honestly, that's not that great, then that might not be the thing that you want to do. Instead, go on to some of these crochet groups or go to a crochet live in real life get together and get opinions from other people. And know that there are more people in your life than just your significant other, even if they're just on social media. You can find others to give you the kind of feedback that you need so that you're not relying on the one that's closest to you, who's also going to be the one that's going to hurt your feelings the most if they don't give you the feedback you're looking for. So there's plenty of places that you can go, whether it's Reddit or Facebook groups, and you can get that kind of, you can share a photo and get the kind of response that you're looking for. Or even if you get a negative response, it might not be as painful. So certainly look at those alternatives when you're considering, how am I going to cope with this? Another tip is to really just kind of ground yourself. And I don't mean like getting really woo-woo out here, but to brace yourself for whatever response might come. So if you go into this very excited and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing shirt that I've ever crocheted and I can't wait to see what he has to say about it. And all of a sudden, you're on cloud 9 and all of a sudden he gives you a less than stellar response and it knocks you down to, the pit. One thing you can do to avoid that fall is to get grounded. And grounding is really just a process of mentally preparing yourself for whatever might result, whatever might be the result or the reaction, and realizing, there's other alternatives. Maybe he's going to tell me this. Am I going to be okay if he tells me this? What if he says that? Am I going to be okay if he says that? There are more possibilities here than the outcome that I hope for the most. And if I get one of those alternative possibilities, am I going to be okay with that? So it's kind of a mental check-in to see where you are and how you might respond based on various results. It's totally okay to hope that you get that wow response, but don't have that expectation because you're putting a lot on their shoulders. And especially if your confidence is tied to that response. That need for the confidence boost could be exactly what tips it over the edge for you that makes it such a negative experience. You're expecting them to boost your confidence, and they did just the opposite. So shifting our perspective and allowing ourselves to say, this is not going to be what my confidence is tied to. I'm going to be okay even if he doesn't like it, or I'm going to prepare him that I need to hear a positive response, or I'm not even going to share it with them because I'm going to go to somebody else that I know is going to really give me the positive response that I'm looking for, that speaks the language that I need to hear. So those are some tips around that I have learned over the years. I'd love to say that these are things that I've always known, and they are not. They are not. It takes practice and it takes commitment. And my suggestion to you would be to save this video and go back and watch it over and over and over again whenever you need that reminder that others cannot be, and to watch it over and over and over again whenever you need that reminder that we don't need somebody else to boost our confidence, that we don't need them to respond the way that we expect them to respond. We can hope for it, but we can't expect it. And it's that expectation that often is our biggest challenge, the reason that we have the most negative outcome. So when you can shift your perspective and you can shift your expectations and come at it with a different concept of what that's going to look like, then you empower yourself and you get grounded and you have a better outcome overall. Now I know this is a very personal development topic grounded in the concept of our reactions when we finish a crochet project. So hopefully you enjoy it. I really like having these kind of conversations, crochet and coffee, and just chatting about some life lessons that I think are really valuable that can be tied directly to crocheting while I crochet. I like it. So hopefully you do too. And if you do like this kind of content, make sure that you hit the like button because that's what tells YouTube that I'm doing a good job. And subscribe so you always have great content to watch while you're working on your latest crochet project. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.